All right, today we are diving into one of the most baffling, but also one of the most influential literary movements of the 20th century, absurdism. So let's just jump right in. Everything really starts with this one line, just four simple words: nothing to be done. This is how Samuel Beckett opens Waiting for Godot, maybe the most famous play of the entire movement. It's not some grand opening or a dramatic hook. It's a statement of, well, nothing. And it perfectly sets a very, very strange stage. And that, of course, brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Why on earth would anyone want to sit through a play where, famously, nothing happens? I mean, what's the point? Well, that's exactly the mystery we're going to unravel today. To really get a handle on absurdism, you have to start with its most iconic example. And trust me, it feels more like a riddle than a piece of theater. So get this. Here's the entire plot. You've got two guys, Vladimir and Estragon, and they're waiting by this lonely road with just a single tree. They talk, they bicker, they meet a couple of other strange characters, but mostly they just wait. They're waiting for someone named Godot. And, spoiler alert, he never shows up. That's it. That's the play. Now, you can probably imagine how audiences in the 1950s felt about this. They were used to plays with clear stories, with beginnings, middles, and satisfying ends. And instead, they got this thing that just goes in circles and finishes right back where it started. People were just baffled. They called it completely obscure. And honestly, can you blame them? So what in the world was Beckett trying to do? Well, to find the answer, we have to look away from the stage for a minute and look at the real world. Because absurdism didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a direct response to a very specific moment in history. I mean, just think about what the world felt like in the late 1940s and 50s. Europe was literally in ruins after World War II. The horrors of the Holocaust had revealed a level of evil that just defied any kind of rational explanation. And then boom, just as that nightmare ends, the whole world is thrown into the Cold War, living under the constant, terrifying threat of nuclear bombs. It was a time of deep, deep pessimism. And that is the absolute key to understanding this. Absurdism was like an artistic mirror held up to a world that felt completely meaningless and irrational. You know, if life itself seems like a cruel, pointless joke, then why should art pretend that everything makes sense? Why would you write a play with a neat, tidy plot when the world outside the theater had been shattered into a million pieces? Okay, so now we kind of get the why behind it all, so let's break down the what. What are the actual rules for a genre that on the surface seems to have no rules at all? Well, the name itself actually came from a critic, a guy named Martin Esslin. He's the one who called it the theater of the absurd, and his definition really hits the nail on the head. These plays basically threw out the entire theatrical rulebook. They did it to explore this deeper, much more troubling truth about what it feels like to be a human being in a universe that doesn't seem to make any sense. And the break from tradition was radical. Think about it. Conventional theater, it gives you a logical story, a setting you can recognize, characters you feel like you get to know. Absurdist theater, it gives you the exact opposite. Plots that are circular, that go nowhere. Vague settings that could be anywhere or nowhere. Characters who might not even have names. And dialogue that's just repetitive, nonsensical, and full of cliches. This was a huge theme for them. The absurdist playwrights were totally obsessed with the failure of language. They wanted to show how the very words we use to try and connect with each other, to create meaning, can so often do the exact opposite. Language itself just becomes another way we feel confused and isolated. Here's a perfect, wonderfully weird example of this. In another major absurdist play, The Bald Soprano by Eugène Ionesco, there's a scene where a clock on the wall just strikes 17 times, for no reason. It's such a brilliant little moment of absurdity because it takes something we totally rely on for order and logic, time, and shows that it's just as random and nonsensical as everything else. So when you really boil it all down, these plays are wrestling with some of the heaviest ideas you can imagine. They're exploring that feeling that maybe everything we do is pointless, that we're all fundamentally alone, and that we keep failing to really connect with each other. And all of this is happening in a world where life and death can seem completely random. Yeah, it's bleak stuff for sure, but it's also incredibly human. Okay, so we have these baffling plays. We have this pretty grim philosophy, but why should any of this matter to us today? Well, you might be surprised just how relevant it all is. Right now, you're probably thinking, okay, this is all very intellectual, very 1950s, something you read about in a dusty textbook. But that's where you'd be wrong.
You see, while the official movement was pretty short-lived, its core ideas never really went away. Instead, they got absorbed into our cultural bloodstream. What was once shocking and new just became familiar, and its DNA started popping up in some of the most unexpected places.
And once you start looking, you see it everywhere. Take Seinfeld. It was literally pitched as the show about nothing, just characters waiting around, having these circular conversations about trivial things that lead absolutely nowhere. Sound familiar? Or how about The Simpsons, with its totally random, nonsensical gags, like a swordfish just falling out of the sky onto Homer's car for no reason at all? That's pure absurdism. And then you have a masterpiece like Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, which is this perfect satire where the fate of the entire world depends on incompetent bureaucrats and ridiculous rules. That is the futility of human action, just played out on a global scale.
So here's the really wild part. What was once totally avant-garde and shocking is now just a standard tool in our comedy and satire. This absurdist way of looking at the world, of pointing out how illogical and random and futile it can all be, it's not some fringe idea anymore. It's just part of how we see things.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. We started out by asking why anyone would watch a play where nothing happens. Well, maybe the answer is that it was just practice, because now that you can see the patterns of absurdism in the culture all around you, does our own world really seem any less absurd than the one on Beckett's stage? Something to think about.